to Deep Thoughts, Shallow Plots.
My name's Erika, and I like to watch horror movies.
My name's Katy, and I really like to overanalyze things. What are we overanalyzing today?
Today, Katy, we are overanalyzing the 1983 slasher classic, Sleepaway Camp, which is kind of, as you just said off mic, a mix between Friday the 13th and Psycho. I think that's a pretty good way to describe it. There's a bunch of kids at a summer camp, one of which is, a quiet,
meek little girl
named Angela, and people pick on her a lot, and the people who pick on her suddenly seem to die in creative and horrific ways.
In very poetically justified ways, perhaps.
Which is what I like to say, and then hilarity ensues,
yeah.
Right? But then, unfortunately, the hilarity can't take us through the end of the film because there's a very unhilarious
final reveal ending
in the last 30 seconds of the film. Yeah.
And I feel like we need to sort of get that out of the way right in the beginning, because that's what we're going to be talking about this whole time, which is that Angela at the end is revealed not just to be the killer, but also a trans woman, or a woman who is being forced to cross-dress by her aunt, a boy, I should say, who is being forced to cross-dress by her aunt, or how exactly we want to word that.
I mean, well, we can't possibly word it worse than the way they do in the film.
Yes.
Where, what's that guy's name again?
Ronnie, where
he says, "My God, she's a boy."
Yeah.
I think as long as we don't say that, I think it's fine. I mean, in simplest terms, Angela is revealed to have a penis. That's...
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is probably the simplest terms to put it. And it does bring up the question of how, as we're doing this podcast, we're going to be referring to Angela. Mm-hmm. I guess later, I have not seen the sequels, but later she continues to be a girl who is transitioned, so perhaps as a trans woman. This is my
understanding. Yes.
For that reason.
Yeah.
I think we will be referring to her by she, her pronouns, because that's what she uses in the course of this film, whether or not it's unclear at this point, but she has not chosen any other pronouns. So.
And I don't know how much this is really worth, but to me it's worth something that Angela is played by a female actress.
Yeah. Until those last moments.
Oh, yeah. When they get
a fully adult man to be her body.
Have you heard that story?
Yeah.
About the drunk college guy?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That they just got some guy.
They just got a college guy, and he was just like, "I'll only do it if I'm really drunk." And I was like, that should have been your red flag. You should have gotten somebody who could do it
with a little more respect.
Yeah.
And if that was the only way, then maybe your movie perhaps has some problems with its twist ending.
I don't know, man. I also feel like we got to remember that this is 1983.
Yeah.
I'm not excusing any of the actions or the story or the reveal, but
but even in the 80s, I mean, trans people, and especially trans women and trans women of color and trans sex workers are all people who are much, much, much more likely to be victims of violence than to be perpetrators of violence.
This is true.
And so stories like this and cross-dressing killers or whatever you want to call it, these are really harmful depictions because they're representing trans people as deceptive and aggressive. And these have consequences because we can use these ideas to justify violence against trans people, which is how we get things like gay and trans panic defenses, and how we get a bunch of our current laws about supposedly protecting cis women from violent men or whatever, but which is really just keeping trans women from using
who can go into what
the
proper
bathroom. Yeah. So I think a lot of people fairly find this movie kind of painful to watch.
Sure, yeah.
And at the same time, there are some modern trans and queer viewers who actually find a lot to love in it, and
it's kind of thinking about why so many queer people really like horror and seeing themselves reflected in horror, even if they're only reflected as the monsters,
right?
But seeing that monster and seeing that monster is possibly sympathetic, being sympathetic to them, it's kind of in a way problematically empowering as well, it's if you don't see yourself represented anywhere in the culture, then you'll take whatever you can get,
right?
Even if it's a pretty poor representation of what your life is actually like.
Yeah. No, and I think there's actually there's an author, Harmony Colangelo, who has written quite a bit about Sleepaway Camp, and her wife are coming out with a book about it soon. It might be out by the time this podcast goes out. I don't know.
I don't know either.
But no, she has an article specifically called The Transgender Defense of Angela Baker and Sleepaway Camp. And something she brings to the discussion that I thought was really interesting is this idea that, well, here, I'll just read it in her own words.
Okay.
In a backwards way to how things play out in most films, all of this makes Angela Baker a tragic example of how important gender expression is. In Angela's brain, she is Peter, but people keep calling her by a name she doesn't want to be called and misgendering her. That is the plot of all films about transitioning, but because it takes place in reverse and is attached to a problematic film like Sleepaway Camp, it is discounted on all counts. That is doing a disservice to what this film has to say, whether it was the creator's intentions or not. Just as an example of how people are sort of reclaiming this film and finding something in this film, finding a sort of representation in this film, even despite of like its problematic elements, or even because of its problematic elements.
Right.
And I think that one's interesting in particular for seeing it as sort of like a trans story, but as Peter being forced to be a girl, you know, instead of another reading of Angela as a trans woman.
Yeah. And yeah, that's the thing is that I also, with the information that I have about like the making of this film, like I don't think there was any intention. Like,
well, that is the thing.
I just think they were like, wouldn't it be funny if she had a penis?
Yeah, or I mean, not even funny. I think wouldn't it be shocking? Wouldn't it be disturbing? Wouldn't it be horrifying?
Yeah,
you know.
Yeah.
I mean, that's why the final shock
Yeah.
is she's a boy instead of she's the killer.
Yeah,
because like it is shocking that Angela's the killer.
Is it shocking that Angela's the killer? It's pretty obvious Angela's the killer.
I mean, I think it is equally obvious between her and Ricky.
Right. Yeah, I was noticing that because I gave it a rewatch a couple days ago, and I was just like, oh, yeah, like it actually does make sense that it could have been Angela or Ricky because of like who's dying and the previous interaction they had.
I've only seen this movie with the ending already spoiled, so
Fair.
I can't really say
Me too. Yeah.
A modern, you know, like the audience viewing it for the first time would react to it. But I think having the meek, quiet girl ending up being a vicious killer is kind of surprising. It's a twist. Even if you see it coming or not, it's a twist. It's unexpected. She seems more like a final girl. But still, yeah, I agree. I don't think intention on the part of the filmmakers was there for this to be some sort of like trans liberation, trans revenge type story. No. But it's interesting that it can be read that way still, nonetheless.
Yeah. You know, it's a really interesting movie. And honestly, I feel like if it didn't have that last reveal, I almost wonder if anybody would still care about this movie.
Yes. I wonder that too.
Yeah.
If it would still be any sort of cult classic without that. And like, if not, does that make it more problematic to like watch it today? I don't know. That's a weird half-formed thought.
Yeah.
Like, can it be reclaimed if the only reason why it was ever popular is because people were so shocked and disgusted by like this like really transphobic ending?
Yeah, right.
Like, just because as a modern audience we can have sympathy for Angela. Like, is there still value in that? I don't know. It's a complicated movie.
I would love to talk about what I call when we'll talk about the genres and talk about the horror stuff that like honestly I find every single kill in this movie to be really, really well done. And honestly, like I think the kills are really creative. I like how it's not the same thing every time, right? Like if we're thinking about the slasher, which, you know, I think we could pretty easily call this movie a slasher, even though it doesn't really fit the archetypes.
I want to talk
well.
about that.
Yeah.
I want to talk about what to call this genre wise. Within the heading of horror.
A lot of ways it really does fit a really traditional slasher because, you know, it's like one setting, you know, a lot of people are dying over, you know, what's to be like a relatively short period of time. There's
and it ramps up.
There's the ramp up, there's the escalation, there's like you know, obviously the fact that it takes place at a summer camp is like a huge aspect, you know,
yeah,
of like
because they were clearly cashing in on the success of like Friday the 13th,
right,
and other slashers like that.
Yeah, exactly. So I do think it is a slasher, but when we think about the 5 main hallmarks, it's not so straightforward.
Yeah.
But I actually do think it's a pretty good horror movie, and I do think a lot of the effects hold up really well for 1983, especially for how cheaply this movie was made. I was, you know, kind of counting the kills and taking note of them, and I really like how they're all different. Nobody dies the same way twice, right?
Right, yeah.
And how they like in some ways connect with like a traditional summer camp theme, like drowning in the lake,
yeah,
in the canoe, right? And then the beehive
Right.
You know?
Frank. And the Arrow.
Yeah. And then, of course, I think we would be remiss if we didn't mention the really, really heavy-handed music in the opening scene.
Oh my God. No, yeah. When we were watching it, I was just like, is this going too hard?
Yeah, it's going really hard. Yeah. And it's funny because what we're seeing visually is actually really gorgeous. Like this lake.
Yeah.
In the fall, the leaves are starting to turn, but like this, whoa, really...
yeah, I was like, is the horror because this is like a beautiful camp, but it's like deserted, so obviously something bad has happened here.
Yeah,
because then later we get some like police tape also, or or like no trespass or something. It's like boarded off or something.
Yeah, I feel like maybe we could have had some stuff broken,
had some blood, something, some sort of sign that something bad happened here. Because instead we just go
it's like a gorgeous view.
Yeah, and like a little bit in the background of like kids laughing.
Yeah.
And
I was like, what am I supposed to think
it's
here?
Weird.
But I think all the kills are really creative. Like, actually, and I think when the first one, Artie, when he gets burnt, because he actually, I don't think he does technically die.
No.
He just gets very badly burnt. Like, the effects on his burns are just are really great. Yeah, and actually, honestly, I think that actor really committed to it. Like, that guy was screaming his head off. I think when Kenny dies, the water snake was just a chef kiss. Beautiful touch.
They do go with that.
Also, it's worth noting that Kenny and whoever his friend was are smoking marijuana before they get in the boats.
Oh,
so obviously they need to die. Like they broke the slasher rule. They did drugs, right?
Yeah.
I like Billy gets stung to death by bees. Like that was a fun kind of, new way to do it. And then Meg's death, I feel like getting stabbed in the shower was just a really clever way to do that on a low budget, because they're just knife going into wall.
Yeah.
Meg pretending to be stabbed.
Yeah. Plus it makes for another great Psycho reference.
Yeah, it does. You're right. That's a good point. And then I also really enjoyed the horror that is the contrast between the light and the shadow when Angela kills Judy. Mm-hmm. Although it is, in my opinion, the most disturbing death.
Oh my God. I did not realize what was going down in that scene. I was like, she somehow kills her with a hot iron? How?
Yeah, it took me a while. I actually had to
somebody read it online. I was like,
is that what happened?
Oh.
But also, even if that is what happens, even if she gets, assaulted with her curling iron, that's not going to kill her?
Well, I guess she's also getting smothered with a pillow.
Oh, that's fair. So, yeah, you're right. So it's kind of like a...
Smothered while getting assaulted.
Woof, yeah.
Violated like that.
Yeah, that was probably,
but it wasn't a plugged-in, turned-on hot iron.
Well, she was... Judy
she had been using,
curling her hair earlier. Okay. But, I don't know if it was plugged in. I don't know how hot it still would have been.
Well, in the 80s, those ones probably went pretty hot without a lot of...
Those freaking 80s, yeah. I don't know. Then Mel gets an arrow right through the throat in the archery range. Mm-hmm. And then we don't see Paul's death, but Paul dies too.
Yeah.
We're meant to believe that he's been, straight up decapitated, right? Yeah, so, I was talking about these 5 main aspects of a slasher, at least according to Carol J. Clover, is the killer, right?
Mm-hmm.
Who's Angela? Mm-hmm. The weapon, which there are so many, right?
Yeah.
Each kill is different. Angela has a very large skill set.
Yeah.
Get it, girl. The setting is a summer camp,
so that one's
bathrooms outside, Yeah. There's the shock, right, which, is that that Angela is quote unquote actually Peter, whatever. Yeah. But then there's also the final girl. Who's the final girl? I think it's Angela.
Yeah. I mean, there were some people talking about how perhaps being able to read the one camp counselor who's nice to Angela,
I guess,
who's still alive at the end, because she's part of the reveal at the end. It's her and Ronnie who see.
But
she's such a non-character.
She doesn't do anything.
She's not a character.
Yeah, we
she never
have
fights
no
back.
investment in her.
Yeah,
I don't even remember her name.
Yeah. No, people were bringing her up mostly to be she's the closest we have.
And I was like, no.
And she sucks at it.
I think Angela's the closest we have. And I think that's okay. So it's really interesting to see the connection between the killer. Because there's always a very interesting special connection between the killer and the final girl, the slasher.
True. Yeah.
And so it's interesting that it's
a very important bond.
Effectively the same person.
Yeah. And I think that also kind of ties into the idea of a little bit what you were saying earlier about people sort of finding representation in this, that even though it's this problematic representation, it's what other representation is there?
Exactly.
What does it say about us as a society, as viewers, that we have so few trans women in the horror genre? that we can like hold up in comparison to Angela. Mm-hmm. You know, there are a few more movies now that have like trans women in the center of their horror movies, but it's still pretty goddamn rare.
Yeah.
So it's like, even though this film presents Angela as like this, you know, killer in this problematic way, they also give her like a lot of depth. And there's also something about how our culture also just really loves to root for like the quote unquote villain, especially when the villain is given a lot of like justification.
Truly. Oh,
a lot of reasons for why they're doing what they're doing. And that it's a way to view people as like just people who do both good and bad things, rather than as just like monsters or whatever.
And people in general being so much more than the worst thing they ever did.
Yeah. I mean, and it's like having a villain at least is better than having, I don't know, maybe no trans characters or a trans character to the side who's just like token diversity points. Or maybe it's not, depending on how problematic that representation is. I think it's like an interesting line that everybody kind of decides for themselves.
Yeah, because also it would not be very smart of us to lump all trans people together as having the exact same feelings about Angela's character in Sleepaway Camp.
I saw a lot of different, not just from trans people, but people elsewhere on the queer spectrum as well, who just have different experiences as queer people and thus can find ways to relate to Angela as somebody who is queer coded.
And also
find this like horror in watching Angela and the way that she is treated.
And also kind of putting it into the context of like where they were when they first saw it, you know?
Yeah. And like what the people around them reacted in different ways and things.
Yeah. It's such a rich tapestry.
Yeah. And it's definitely one that I wanted to get a lot of different views on because
absolutely. Yeah.
Neither of us were coming to this movie as trans women.
Yeah.
Or like trans feminine people. And so I wanted to see what other people thought. And there's a lot of messy, complicated thoughts about this movie that are really interesting to get into. This isn't really related other than the fact that we're sort of talking about genre and horror and all of that. Another thing that I saw was, especially in Aspen Nelson's Why Trans Women Can't Have a Promising Young Woman Yet, a lesson from Sleepaway Camp, that this movie could also be read less as a slasher and more as like a rape revenge film. Like there's no actual act of rape, but Angela is this victim who is like righteously seeking revenge.
Yeah, things happen to Angela without Angela saying it's okay.
Yeah, she doesn't
like
consent.
a lot.
Yeah. And so you kind of root for her in this way, like you would for a lot of other, you know, revenge films. But this article also brought up a lot of interesting things about like it's very different to have like a cis white woman getting this like revenge fantasy film versus like a trans woman who's often already been stereotyped as like violent, or like black women who are like angry and aggressive. Can they have a revenge film in the same way?
Do you remember when we watched Ticked Off Trannies with Knives?
I do.
Do you remember anything about that movie?
I remember Willem was in it.
Willem and Roxy Andrews' mom, Erika Andrews, was also in it.
That is the extent of my memory.
I remember there was a scene where they like put some kind of weapon up a dude's butt. And like if he moved or did something, then like he would get hurt basically. And then I remember that guy yelling like, "You're sick," you know, and then Willem's character is like, "It's sickening," or something like that. And I was like, okay, this movie. Woo, that was a movie.
Right, yeah. It becomes so much harder to make the revenge not come across as these really damaging stereotypes in this world of like trans misogyny and misogynoir, you know? And it's like we can start off sympathizing with Angela as we see her as this like meek cis girl.
Yeah.
And then we get this twist ending where it's like she's no longer allowed to be this like wronged woman, but instead she's like this quote unquote man who's like committing murder. And isn't it scary and horrifying? And this article also pointed out like the difference between Angela and her very, very small cult following and like Carrie, which is a very similar story.
It is a similar story.
It's a girl getting bullied and basically getting revenge, you know?
A quiet, meek. Yeah. Never did nothing to nobody.
Yeah.
With a weird, overbearing mother figure.
Yeah.
That's true.
And Carrie is a character who gets so much sympathy.
Yeah.
Whereas I don't think Angela does.
No. What do you think about the function of what are obviously Peter and Angela's two gay dads?
Yeah!
So, like...
The one dad is Lenny. I don't know the other dad's name.
I don't know either,
the surviving dad is Lenny.
Lenny, okay.
And then the other dad who dies.
Yeah. So, like... it's obvious to like the trained eye in that opening scene that was like, oh, they're gay. Yeah.
No, I remember saying to you,
Yeah.
I am going to assume until the movie inevitably proves me wrong that these are two gay dads.
Yeah.
Because I just assumed that the movie would inevitably prove
Say
me
no,
wrong.
yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
But then later it was like, oh no, these are two gay dads.
Two gay dads. And
love
like,
this for them.
And that scene where like young Peter and young Angela are like giggling at them.
Yeah.
And it's like, is this movie like trying to tell us that like part of the reason why Angela is so like strange or is a killer is like because she has two dads?
I could see reading it that way. That is not how I read it.
Okay, how'd you read it? Because I would prefer to not think about it that way.
I guess, okay. My thought is that, like, I felt really bad for Lenny, the surviving dad, for not being able to get custody of, at the time,
Peter.
Peter,
yeah.
rather.
Yeah.
Wrong biblical name. And it's like, how would this film have played out if he had? And the deal is that it wouldn't have.
It's just,
It's like heteronormativity that put Angela in this position to go live with her aunt.
Yeah.
Her crazy fucking aunt.
Oh my
because
God, dude.
couldn't be allowed to live with Lenny, who apparently, it seems like, had been co-parenting both of these children.
Yeah.
For a while.
Yeah. We don't ever find out, like, what's up with Peter and Angela's mom.
Yeah.
If she's just, like, out of the picture.
Apparently, because they end up with Aunt Martha.
An aunt, yeah.
And it turns out that systemic homophobia is the real villain all along.
All along, tell me about it.
But I mean, but where I'm going with this, I guess, is that it seems important to me that the few scenes that we do get of their family, it's like a really happy family. Like, they're co-parenting these children.
Yeah.
They're having a nice beach day.
Yeah.
You know, like, they clearly love each other, these two dads. And that scene where they're giggling, I kind of took it more as the way that kids laugh when you see your parents being lovey-dovey. It didn't seem like a malicious sort of like...
Yeah.
It just seemed like kids who didn't know anything and were just like, oh, there's our parents and they're in love. And isn't that kind of silly and gross but also sweet? You know, in that way that kids feel.
Yeah.
It's interesting also that they were like, I think Lenny says like, oh, your sister's on the way or something about the aunt coming. So it's
that's
like,
right, yeah.
So it's like the aunt also knows about this relationship.
Right.
So it's not even like a closeted thing. It's like this really open relationship that's like not a big deal and it's like really loving.
Yeah.
And it's like a good thing for these kids.
Yeah.
And then this teen heterosexual nonsense comes in.
Right. But then...
And straight people killed everyone.
Also, like, once we get... So we've got the setup of the two gay dads, right?
Yeah.
But then once we get to the summer camp, I don't know how many straight people actually go to the summer camp. Because we talked already about Paul.
Yeah.
Right?
I have questions about Paul.
I also have questions about Paul, but I also have questions about Judy.
I have questions about Judy.
So Judy as well as Meg.
Yeah.
M-E-G. Meg. They're both like kind of like the mean girls, right? Yeah. And they're really interesting because Judy is harassing and bullying Angela and then like gets jealous when Paul starts to show her attention, right? And it's just like, why are you like so wrapped up in what's happening with Angela? Like, why are you like this? And then she also does, what does she compliments Angela's body. Do you remember that? She
really.
says like
Not specifically.
something about that rockin' bod or something. Like when they're like at the waterfront, you know, and like compliments her body. And then like, she's like always like wants to be all up in Angela's business. She's like, she's like, why don't you shower with the rest of us? You know? And it's just like, why the fuck do you care when she showers?
She's always trying to figure out what's going on with Angela's body.
Yeah.
Try to get her like naked
care?
or half dressed,
And
get
then
her out of her clothes.
She's like, what are you, queer or something? You know? And it's just like, why does it matter, Judy? Why does it matter? Then it's also really interesting. What like cracked me up the first time watching it is that like, I think Judy says something to Angela about like being a prude. Like she uses the word prude and it like that word comes with like a really dramatic musical cue. Like
not a prude.
Yeah. And I was like, oh, the 80s. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
So something's going on with Judy for sure.
Yeah, no, I agree. I also think, with all of that sort of like weird, almost voyeuristic policing of Angela's body she does, and also how she's like kissing Paul in a way that's clearly to show off to Angela.
Yeah.
And it's like, what kind of jealousy are you trying to elicit?
Yeah, whose jealousy are you trying to
and
elicit?
also
Yeah.
like what it means that she previously dated Angela's cousin Ricky,
yeah.
who bears quite a resemblance to
They
Angela.
do look a lot alike,
and that when
yeah.
Angela does show up to kill Judy, at first Judy doesn't seem to know whether it's like Ricky or Angela,
Right.
or like if it's a boy or a girl, or like what is happening there. And it's just like, I don't know, it seems like there's something in that.
And all she says is like, don't turn on the light or we'll have to go to the social. Right.
Yeah.
But what she does is what they all do, all the people who get killed by Angela, like when they see Angela, but like we can't see her, you know?
Yeah.
They're like, oh, it's you.
Yeah. They're always just like, oh, just you. What? Oh, okay. Yeah. Little do they know.
Well, yeah. And then did you catch what Kenny, was it Kenny who gets drowned? Kenny.
Yeah.
When he's in the little air pocket in the canoe and Angela pops up.
Oh, yeah.
And he's like, oh, it's you. And what does he say? He says, I think the rest of the guys will be interested in seeing you, or something like that. Like something that like puts Angela in with like the rest of the guys.
In a weird way.
Well, and I think also that's meant to be a little foreshadowing to the twist at the end. But also like as a red herring to think maybe it is Ricky. Right.
Right. Yeah. Because I think there's supposed to be ambiguity between Angela and Ricky.
Yeah.
But I also think Angela's queerness on its own without any of that other stuff is interesting. Because like, especially in terms of like, does she have some sort of like desire for Judy? Does she have any sort of desire for Paul? I think it's like unclear. I mean, now that I am aware, which I did not notice at the time, that part of Angela killing Judy was like sexually assaulting her, is like interesting.
Yeah.
But then, yeah, like we're talking about, the relationship has this tinge of obsession. And I feel like one of the reasons why Judy first sort of picks out Angela as somebody to bully is that she calls Angela out for staring at her.
Right.
Angela is staring at Judy.
Yes.
And it's like, is that desire?
Yeah.
Is that some sort of gender envy?
Is she like giving you the stink eye?
Is it some sort of confusion of all of these feelings?
Or is she like dissociating and just looking somewhere and it happens to be at you?
Is it the creators of this movie trying to like again seed these ideas that Angela is a man and thus is like looking at these, you know, in this woman's space, looking at these women, and we're supposed to be like, yeah. It's interesting. There's actually another quote talking about like there's the transness going on here, but that there's also just sort of like in general, even when you take that out, Angela really works as like a queer coded character.
Yeah.
Elio Emil Billet talks about how Angela is hated throughout the first third of the film because of her mere existence without her having spoken or acted yet.
It's true.
Yeah.
She doesn't do anything and they just start screaming at her.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
No.
Or honestly, like a queer person, or like honestly like a neurodivergent person.
Yeah.
You know, who's like around a lot of neurotypical people who like don't know how to just be a decent human being. No, this writer goes on to say, whether it's the attempted sexual assault by the cook that reminds us of the prevalence of such crimes against trans women, the way that the group of young people view her as other and different from the moment she arrives, the violence when confronted with her muteness that can be seen as a metaphor for how cis people react to trans people they don't understand, or even the name calling, every scene screams to us that Angela is queer. Yeah. You know, and it's like goes beyond the transness. I saw a few different writers, you know, reacting to this film, talking about how it's like everything about the way that people respond to Angela is very much that queer feeling of like, no matter what you do to not get noticed, people are going to notice you and they are going to make comments about you. Yeah. And I think also like a character like Judy, who is like maybe also somewhere on the queer spectrum, but maybe not ready
to confront that.
Or maybe just it has every intention of just ignoring it, you know,
and
pushing it down. Because I mean, I think it sounds like Judy does have some attraction to men because she was hanging out with Ricky the summer before. Remember, like in the beginning of the film, like when we first actually meet her, she's like talking to a bunch of like older boys. Yeah. That maybe she'd be just like, well, I do have a like attraction to the people that I'm supposed to be attracted to, so I'll just like put all my energy and focus in this, and anything like towards the contrary is going to like elicit like a fight response, you know? So yeah, maybe, you know, Judy's like, I don't need Angela here messing up my like summer of heteronormativity, you know?
Yeah. She clearly is. Yeah. Angela very much is there. Or like, I feel like even for the viewer of the 80s,
Right.
we are supposed to see Angela as this like haunting homosexuality, this haunting transness, this like sense of like they're among us, you know? Like queer people are all around us. We never know where they'll be coming from, you know? Like that's the real threat in this movie.
Yeah. I kind of picked up a couple like instances of like what I kind of considered like wolf in sheep's clothing, you know? I see it a couple of times. It's there with the adults in the film who are piss poor excuses for adults, which we'll talk about in a minute. But also like the idea of, you know, thinking about the 1980s as sort of like the 1950s part 2, like with this really big political and social swing back towards conservatism and like, you know, the presidency of Ronald Reagan. And, you know, you think about it, it's like, who is the summer camp for? It's like several weeks long. You know, they're there for a significant period of time. They have like a commissary or a store.
Yeah,
right?
they can buy food.
You can buy food, candy and shit. Like this is a camp for kids with money, right? And also white kids. Like I don't think I saw any campers or really even counselors of color.
Not really, no. Maybe some that could be ambiguous.
Ambiguous, yeah.
That's like the
Jean,
extent.
I think about Jean.
Yeah.
Like Jean could be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
like,
of course we have he becomes the head cook.
Right, Ben.
He's a black man.
Yeah, there's like
but he's like in this like service position.
Yeah, 3 or 4 people of color working in the kitchen.
Yeah,
like in the service positions. Yeah, so it's like, who is this camp for? It's for rich white kids, which is like, if you want to consider it the 1980s, like most precious resource, right?
Yeah.
And so like when they're at this summer camp, who is endangering the well-being of this most precious resource? It's a girl who's quote unquote actually a guy, and like
it's queerness, it's transness, it's
a poor misinterpretation of it, but yeah, basically that's
basically
the thing.
that.
And so like, yeah, it's like Angela, at least, you know, from one perspective, is sort of like this wolf in sheep's clothing, is like meant to be kind of the like the secret queer ruining their
corrupting
fun heteronormative summer. But she's not, right?
Yeah.
Obviously
she
Paul,
was just there living her life, and then people started picking on her.
and she's not the only one. Obviously Paul is in love with Ricky.
Yeah,
which we need to talk about.
Yeah.
And Judy obviously has a lot going on and has like a long way in her bisexual awakening.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, but Angela's the one who shows up and like, and messes it all up.
Right.
You know?
No, but I want to talk more actually about your sort of like 80s as 50s redux, because the other thing you just made me think about actually is Aunt Martha.
Oh my God.
And like the comparison to the family scenes we get of Angela and Peter with their 2 loving gay dads.
Yes.
Compared to Aunt Martha, who is reeks of like the 80s fear of the single mother of like a divorced home.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
in that like controlling, ruined by divorce, overbearing, isolating.
Right.
That like her being a villain in that also very 80s way.
Yeah. God, Aunt Martha just raises so many questions
Aunt Martha raises a lot of questions
for me. But can we just like, but we really need to talk about how in love with Ricky Paul is.
Paul is weird about Ricky.
Yeah. Their exchange.
From the very first moment.
Yes.
I was like, oh, what? You two? What?
And then you like how he talks to Ricky about Judy's boobs.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's like, oh, I'm talking to you about a woman's body, so it's okay, but like.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's like the big moment where Paul is cheating on Ricky's cousin with Ricky's ex until Ricky finds them.
Yeah,
it's like, is this all about Ricky?
This is about Ricky.
Is this what this is about, Paul?
And don't get me wrong, like Ricky's a cutie, you know?
Yeah.
But
also, then
also,
with the interchangeability with Angela and Ricky.
Right, yeah. And also that way too long baseball scene.
The baseball scene is interesting.
Their exchange during the baseball scene is so cute. I do think Paul calls Ricky babe. I think he's like...
in that jocular 80s boy way.
Yeah.
Where those 80s boys can also wear their slutty little crop tops and their short shorts, which I love for them.
That was another thing I noticed, because I asked myself, or like a question came up for me, which is like, how are gender roles enforced in this movie, but also how are they subverted, right? And like, really the big thing is that like all the men are dressed like sluts.
But I mean, that was more of an 80s look.
I guess. I don't know so much.
There's a lot of 80s movies with the guys in their crop tops and their little tight shorts.
Okay, I believe you. And it's interesting how also later in the film, all the guys want to go skinny dipping, but they can't get enough girls to go, so they just all go anyway. Yeah,
because it's just the
whatever
fun of being a little heathen.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Boy, some short shorts, some cropped crop tops.
Yeah.
Like, whew, we are showing a lot of male skin.
Yeah.
And male body in this.
Yeah.
For sure.
There's just a lot of homosexuality going on in this film.
Yeah, especially in the baseball.
Yeah.
In that baseball scene.
Which is like, it's such an interesting scene because it goes on for so long.
It really does.
And the only kind of bearing it has on the plot is that it sort of serves to like kind of build up the tension between Ricky and some of the other boys.
Yeah.
Because they're kind of fighting over the baseball game and then they start to like tease Angela and so he has to stand up for his cousin.
Yeah.
So there's like creating some tension between that. And the other thing is that I think it also adds a little bit to like the theme of like revenge and retribution because it has a lot of talk of like, we'll get them back next time.
Yeah.
You know,
and then
don't worry, Ricky, we'll get them back.
There is an exchange because, like, what do those other boys do? Like, was it water balloons?
Yeah, it was water balloons.
Yeah, and Ricky's all mad about it, and I was like, "It's water balloons. What?
Yeah.
Like with just water in them? Nothing else?
Yeah,
you're fine. Whatever. You're fine."
Well, according to Mel, you could get an eye poked out with those.
Oh, okay. Well, let's believe everything Mel says. Yeah. It is interesting, like, the way that they do it, because, you know, watching it now, it's pretty obvious that Angela's the killer. But, like, the point is that, like, the parody between Angela and Ricky, like, it really could be either of them. And it is interesting, because the first person they get revenge on, because it's Artie, the super creepy kitchen dude.
We will talk about that more later.
Yeah,
but
he doesn't die again, but, like, he's the first one to kind of get revenge, right? And we can see it as a revenge for like the blatant attempted assaults in the lock-in, and I'm like, dude, your coworkers are like right there. And like it's literally dinner time. Like there are 100 people in the kitchen or like in the dining hall right there, and that's how like Ricky walks in, right? You know. And so, yeah, it's like interesting. You know, it could have been seen as Angela getting revenge, but also Ricky getting revenge because he does try to like fight him off.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting that it's Ricky is the one. It's either people talking to Ricky, like his other, I almost said boyfriends, which isn't what I mean, but like his friends who are boys.
Yes.
Saying, you know, we'll get them back about the bullies, or Ricky himself being like, yeah, we'll make them pay. After Angela is dunked into the lake, Ricky tells Angela, we'll make them pay.
Yeah.
He has this very like retributive attitude, which is interesting that he's the one voicing all this desire for revenge.
Yeah.
And like it does help with the red herring of like, is it Angela? Is it Ricky? But I think it also shows that like these children are so powerless. Like, how is he going to make these bullies pay? And also, why is it his job to do so?
Yeah, right.
Why is it his job to, like, defend his cousin from a fucking child molester who is working with children? Like, whose coworkers seem to know this is going on to at least some extent.
Oh, man.
Like, why aren't the adults doing things?
So, you know that I worked at a Girl Scout camp for 3 years. And, like, just
often
watching...
in the kitchen.
In the kitchen, yeah. But, like, even not in the kitchen, like, there's so much stuff that's just, like, you would never let a kid say that. Like, Judy and Meg dig so deep into Angela before the other one.
Ronnie.
No, the girl.
Oh, I forget.
Blonde
we still
girl.
don't fucking know her name.
Chrissy, maybe? I don't know.
I was going to go with Lori.
Before she's like, that's enough. And I was like, you let them verbally abuse her for so long before you were like, okay, that's enough.
Especially considering the fact that Meg isn't even one of the campers. She's a counselor. Who is bullying a child.
Yeah, one of the
campers. She's a child too, but like an older child.
That is the thing about camp counselors, guys. Like, it is kids watching kids.
Yeah.
It's bad. Yeah. But also, like, when they throw Angela in the lake, Mel is so wrapped up in yelling at Ricky and accusing him of murder that he doesn't notice that like Angela is saying like, I don't want to go in the water, please stop, and just like let's
of this
him throw
happen.
her in the water. And I was like, why is nobody stopping them?
And this is how we end up in the situation where Angela has to sort of take her own revenge.
Yeah, because there were so many like places where the checks and balances weren't there.
Yeah.
They just failed, that they're just like,
yeah,
there's a probably 16-year-old counselor named Meg who was like verbally and physically abusing campers.
Yeah. this like 12-year-old.
Yeah, and the adults, like the camp admin, are just like not doing anything about it.
Yeah, there are a few times where they're like, we'll tell Ronnie, because he's like the head counselor, I guess. But like, what does Ronnie even fucking do?
What does Ronnie do?
No, it all comes down to Angela.
Yeah.
And I do want to talk, since we're on revenge
Yeah.
and like retribution, I want to talk also about how exact her retribution is.
It is pretty exact.
If we want to go back through like the murder victim.
I've got him right here.
Yeah. I feel like Artie getting burned in the face.
It makes sense that it would be a kitchen accident
Yeah.
to me. Yeah.
But I don't know that it necessarily... I mean, if I want to get really poetic with the idea of his lust burning him.
Ooh, there you go.
And blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
And I also love her, we see her with an ice cream cone, which is the thing that he was trying to bribe her with. She's like, yeah, I fucking,
Still got my ice cream cone.
Yeah, and I fucking destroyed you.
I could also see Artie's, like, accident, whatever, as, like, his incompetence.
He just should not be in a kitchen.
He shouldn't be in a kitchen.
Yeah.
Or he shouldn't be around children.
Yeah.
Absolutely not. And then it's Kenny.
He's the one who gets the water snake.
Yes.
Which is perfect because that's what he was, like, taunting that other girl with. And then there's the bully that we talked about who hits her with the water balloon, who she kills by putting a wasp nest into the locked bathroom.
Yes.
Which is great because then Paul says about it, someone was playing a prank that got out of hand.
Yes.
And it's like, that's exactly how it's meant to be set up. That's why Angela can get away with these things. But it also is like revenge because he played a prank on her.
Yeah.
So she got him back with a prank. Only hers was actually fatal.
Yeah, right.
She's like so exact about it.
But I do wonder, because hold on, where's my kill list here?
After him, it's Meg.
After him, it's Meg.
She gets stabbed in the back.
Or is it Meg, or is it those campers
Oh.
that Eddie's supposed to be in charge of?
Well, we see their dead bodies later.
Yeah. So I was actually going to ask you that about, like, how does the killing of those campers that Eddie is supposed to be watching, like, where does that fit in her revenge?
Okay, so first, in terms of what we see.
Right.
We get Meg, who is stabbed in the back because she's supposed to be a counselor who is watching these kids, but instead she's being horrible and bullying them with Judy. So I'm like, backstab the backstabber.
Yeah, fuck
that
Meg.
one works for me.
Yeah.
Judy, who, as we said, according to the internet, though we did not pick up on it, is smothered by a pillow and then like penetrated with a hot iron in some way.
Yeah.
Which I can see that as like a symbol of like her newfound hyper femininity sort of stuff, and also her like quote unquote sluttiness. And getting killed on the bed where she was just like making out with an older boy.
She was making out with an older boy.
So like that one all works. Yeah. But then we get to the campers who we see have been axed to death.
Yes. Yeah.
Like just crazy axed to death. And I think it's maybe supposed to be the same boys who were like kicking sand at her or like sort of bullying her, but like not to the extent the other ones were.
Yeah.
And they were clearly like younger kids. And I just,
they were younger.
That
yeah,
one's
I
harder
that.
to see the poetic justice of. Because that's also when things start to ramp up. That's the one.
Yeah.
That's the one that to me is sort of signals that, okay, things are getting out of hand. These are no longer like retributive. These are like...
I almost wonder if Angela was there to like kill Eddie.
Yeah.
But then Eddie wasn't there.
Maybe.
And just like ramped up, ready to go berserk. And so was just like, fuck it, I'll just kill the people who are here.
They're here. Yeah. I don't know. And then after that, we get Mel with the arrow through the throat. Which in my mind, I was like, yes, because he never prioritized camp safety.
He never did. You're right. Yeah.
Of course he would accidentally get, Yeah.
And
he would be
also,
standing in front of the archery range.
And as I said, fantastic shot. Like right through his throat.
I know. Apparently Angela's been working on that.
Right. And like, this is the thing is like, Angela has a very large skill set.
Yeah.
Like she can cut open screens and like find a wasp or bee's nest, and, like,
and not get stung by it,
and can like drown a dude who, according to Ronnie, was a very good swimmer. Like she's got a large skill set. Good for her.
And then of course our last death where she fully decapitates somebody.
Oh yeah.
Which is very poetic because she like tricks him with like sexy times. And then I don't know. I feel like anytime you have something getting like decapitated, we're talking about like separation from the body. Which I feel like is perhaps the way he made Angela feel. Was very like disconnected from her body, very much like not having control over her body.
Right.
In the way that he kept going over her boundaries.
Yeah, it was so unfortunate because I was really rooting for Paul at the beginning of this film. Like I thought he was really sweet. He was like fine with her not talking, and then like gets really excited when she says goodnight, and then like almost immediately after
it's like kissing her without
asking.
He starts like touching her chest when she's like hasn't given that permission.
Oh yeah, and that's kind of when we get that weird flashback to her two dads.
Yeah, because I was with you with that, where I thought I had a lot of sympathy for Paul, even when he did start to press over her boundaries a little bit because I was kind of like, all of these people are just kids, and sometimes kids do crappy things to other kids.
And also, like, it's probably what he was taught.
You know?
Yeah.
And, like, he kisses her first, and then, like, he asks her if it was, like, kind of okay, and she doesn't really say anything.
She doesn't really say anything,
and looks sort of uncomfortable, but she doesn't talk a lot. So then he just kisses her again, and I'm like, I don't...
No.
But then later we see them, and she seems to be enjoying herself and kissing him, and they're, like, holding hands, and it's, like, great. And then he touches her chest, and she's like, no.
Oh, yeah, and then I think there's a lot of confusion from Paul. It's just like, wait, so you're okay with this, but not that?
Yeah.
Or, like, you weren't okay with it yesterday, but you're okay with it now? And it's just like, yeah. Paul.
Yeah, he gets really mad whenever she tries to set a boundary.
Yeah, it's like people are allowed to change their mind, and, like, just because something was okay on Tuesday doesn't make it okay on Wednesday. Like, it's sorry. A thing. Yeah.
But I do think it's interesting that that's when we get the flashback to her dad's.
Right.
Where it is like, was she actually enjoying being with Paul? But then she thought of her dad's, and that, like, made her sad, or that made her think, oh, this is gay, and gay is bad.
And gay is bad. Yeah.
Or is it just that, like, she knows she has this secret that she doesn't want to be revealed? Or is it just that, like, she doesn't want to fucking be touched, and that's fine? You know? Like, the movie's sort of unclear on it all.
Like, she doesn't know Paul like that yet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But, like, so, like, the movie's unclear, but also she very firmly is like, I don't want this, and that should be clear enough for Paul, but he doesn't fucking listen.
It's like well, you didn't say no.
Yeah.
And it's like, no, that's not how this
But
works.
yeah, and his death is interesting because we don't actually see it.
No,
we don't know
we
how
don't
it plays
get to
out.
see it. Yeah,
we don't. Yeah,
we see him, like,
decapitated.
Yeah, and what does Angela say? Like, meet me at the lake or something.
Yeah, so we know that he went to meet her at the lake, and supposedly that they were gonna, like, make out some more, and who knows what else. Yeah. Somehow they both end up naked.
That's true. They are both naked.
So, like, did Paul have some sort of reaction to that? Was he already dead? Mm-hmm. It's an interesting thing in comparison to, like, other depictions in, like, you know, the Crying Game or whatever.
Why are they naked?
Of, like, that it's like an inversion of, like, when that happens, and it's like a cis man, like, often will kill or, like, assault someone because they'll feel that they've been tricked or into being gay or whatever, and instead we have it, like, the other way around. I don't know. It's just weird that we don't get that moment and know exactly what happened there.
Or maybe, like, Angela was just looking for any excuse, you know? It's just like, Paul's on thin ice, man.
Yeah,
he's
Paul's on thin fucking
he's
ice.
about to get murdered. And she was just like, you know, like, I beg you, like, tip it over the edge, you know? And, like, maybe there is, like, a moment where there is a lack of clothing, you know, and be like, yeah, say something about it.
Yeah. I don't know, but, like, we really don't know how Paul would respond to that.
That's true.
Like, maybe he'd be like, yeah, I like you, Angela.
Aw.
You know, we don't know, since, you know, he also likes Ricky, so.
Yeah, right.
I do still feel like the only reason he first noticed Angela was because it was Ricky's cousin, so.
Right. Yeah.
So, I don't know. Their whole relationship is weird.
Really? Tell me about it.
Oh my God, though. No, actually, wait. This is skipping back a little bit to the kids who get axed.
Yes, the kids, yeah.
I forgot that I realized, you know, how Angela is very understandably afraid of water.
Yeah.
Those people getting axed in the day that has the most murders happens right after Judy and Meg dump her into the water.
That's right.
So I feel like that's actually, that, like, trauma getting triggered is maybe actually what's, like, initiating all of this to, like, escalate.
Right.
And it becomes sort of, like, less about, like, specific revenge and more about just sort of revenge against the whole camp society, the whole heteronormative everything, the, you know, dumb teens who killed her dad and sister, you know?
Yeah. And I also thought that, too. It's like, for at least, like, a good chunk of the first half, Angela is, like, pretty much in, like, a freeze response. Like, she's not eating, she's not speaking.
Yeah.
She's not even
clearly
really, like,
a traumatized child.
moving that much, you know? Yeah. And it was just like, this freeze response is, like, a pretty typical trauma response. And, like, no one around her cares.
Yeah.
They just, like, yell at her as to, like, why she's not eating and not talking. And it's like, definitely scream in Angela's face. That's gonna make it better.
I think that is one of the few things that Ronnie actually does contribute, is that he's one of the ones who talks to her, like, kind of, like, really nicely about it and, like, tries to be there for her, like, oh, why aren't we eating? Can we figure out something
Let's figure out something you can eat. Yeah.
But then I think he's the one also who just sort of leaves her with the fucking
with Artie.
pedophile. So, like, not great.
Yeah.
So, in the Friday the 13th way, there is this person who we find out is, like, kind of getting revenge for dead family members who were killed by
having been wronged
by some teen campers, you know?
Right, yeah.
There's that. Do you get the sense that maybe Angela also feels some sort of guilt or like some sort of hatred towards pranks, because when this all starts, it's her and her sister sort of like creeping up on her dad and sort of scaring him on the boat, and so they're kind of in this precarious position on the boat, and then they all tip over into the water.
Yeah.
So it sort of all starts with like a prank, a harmless little kid's prank.
And she like understands how out of hand pranks can get.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or like the aspects in the environment that can't be accounted for.
Yeah.
Like that poor girl who obviously wanted to stop water skiing.
Yeah.
She was like literally crying about it. Poor girl. Yeah, maybe she's just anti-prank, you know?
Yeah.
Like the way people get like scared of fire after surviving a fire.
I mean, yeah, because her fear of water makes so much sense considering her background.
Yeah.
I feel like her sort of animus towards pranks might make a lot of sense too, and also her animus towards straight teens doing dumb straight teen shit.
That's fair. Totally fair. Right, and she can't like vocalize it because she doesn't really talk that much.
Yeah, and I'm not sure that you would even have the words for that.
Fair enough, yeah.
You know,
yeah.
especially at that age.
And yeah, like especially if like every time you are literally just sitting and existing, you get yelled at. It makes sense that even if she did want to say something, she'd be like, these people are fucking crazy. I'm not engaging with them, you know?
Yeah. Actually, to go back to Harmony Colangelo, she has this quote: "The framing of Sleepaway Camp presents Angela as the villain, but she is no more of a villain than Frankenstein's monster. Angela didn't want to be a monster. She was turned into one by everyone and everything around her. From where I sit, despite not actually being a trans character, she is an unseen anti-hero doling out cathartic trans justice. She is cursed with a duality because there is no good way to view her as a positive character because she isn't doing good things. At best, there are explanations for why she does what she does, but it will always be a complicated subject. You can blame the bullies and Aunt Martha as the root of Angela's actions, but at the end of the day, she was failed by the system." And just this idea that like what this is actually a story about is a traumatized child who went through some shit that nobody is taking care of.
No.
There's just a lot in this movie of people just sort of like standing in the face of horror but not actually doing anything.
And I think also like obviously Angela's a very like deeply traumatized child, but like I think the other people around her are also traumatized.
Yeah.
And like don't know how to help.
Yeah.
Or don't know how.
I mean, yeah, because I mean, a lot of this is expecting other children to take care of a child.
Right, which, you know, really feeds into the fact that, like, there are no real adults in this film.
Yeah. Do we want to talk about that more? We've been sort of skirting around the fact that there are, like, no adults.
This is where I found another kind of, like, wolves in sheep's clothing thing. Like, Artie is, like, a super creepy kitchen staff dude. And, like, what he's supposed to be is like, you know, the cook at the summer camp, right? He's supposed to be like one of the adults, you know, but like immediately, like he's never not creepy.
No.
The minute we meet him, he's like making weird faces at the campers.
He says there's ain't no such thing as being too young.
Too young?
He calls them weird fucking names.
Yeah. And it's just like, what had to happen for this guy to be like so overtly predatory, you know?
And that everybody else is just allowing it.
Yeah. They're just kind of laughing like, oh, you're crazy, Artie.
Yeah. After he goes down, you know, and he's taken away.
Yeah.
There's Ben, who becomes the new head cook.
That's right, yeah.
He says, "I always thought he had something of the devil in him."
I was like,
and it's like, you're bringing that up now?
Now you're bringing it up, yeah.
Cool, thanks. I mean, he is the one who sort of pushes him back, and he's like, they're too young.
Yeah.
But, like, doesn't do anything about it. He's not, I mean, the other guy's in a position of power over him. Artie's in the position of power. So, like, ugh. And, like, could Ben have gone to Mel about this? What would Mel have fucking done? Probably nothing.
Mel is also not an adult. Right, and, like, this is the other thing, is, like, who are the adults? Like, there's the kitchen staff, right? There's Mel, there's Ronnie, who's like kind of gets as close as we get to like an actual functional adult.
Yeah.
But like
but who seems very young too.
Yeah, but like the counselors are also children.
Yeah, they're
right?
teens.
Yeah, and then there's Mel, who's like just really greedy, you know?
He's super greedy.
And like really self-interested.
And he's also having a quote-unquote relationship with one of the camp counselors.
With MEG Meg. Yeah. Yeah.
Like they're having dinner at his place. Like, what? And, like, also the way the movie does it, they sort of, like, make Meg out to be, like, super in on it and, like, the seducer and, like, kind of a Lolita.
Yeah.
And it's like, no.
No.
He is clearly, like, an adult, full-grown man with a cigar.
Yeah,
This is a child.
Meg is a child. Yeah.
It's just, like, ooh.
Yeah, and, like, the counselors, again, who are also children, like, really let conflict go on for way too long. Like, let people fight, let people yell at each other, and it's just like, oh my gosh, what are you doing? Like, I thought, bleh, you know. And the, like, also, you know, the greediness of Mel is like, how are they dealing with the fact that, like, a camper died by drowning, like accident or murder, that's like a huge emotional toll on the campers and the staff.
Let's address this in some way.
No, but he just like sweeps it under the rug, right?
Yeah.
And like his main concern is
keeping the camp open.
Or like what would like, oh, if the camp gets shut down, like we're screwed, you know, like just say it was an accident.
Yeah. Yeah, and at least Ronnie is there to sort of try to push back against him, but he doesn't get anywhere with it.
He doesn't get anywhere. Yeah. So, yeah, Mel is just like super greedy and self-interested and just, you know, wants whatever is best for him regardless of what
and
that
he really
means for
is,
other people. Yeah.
Like our only adult with any sort of authority who could like actually do something. And what he does is get obsessed with a boy that he decides is the murderer and try to beat this boy to death in public. He tries to beat this boy to death.
Oh, Mel. Tell me about it.
No, God, Mel is fucking crazy wild.
Yeah. And and like his obsession with Meg, right? And then like kind of he kind of loses his mind after he finds Meg. He's like talking to her.
Yeah, and is like going to get revenge for her.
Yeah, not you, Meg. And it's just like, yeah, you would.
Like, how long did you even know Meg?
Right. And it's like him saying not you, Meg is like a perfect example of like, yeah, you only care about the things that pertain specifically to you.
Yeah, you care about this
like
girl.
A child might.
Yeah, no. He's fucking, you know, if I had been the one writing this movie, I also would have had it end with everyone thinking that Mel was the murderer.
Ooh.
Because he did fucking beat Ricky to death. Did. Oh, not quite to death. Ricky is still alive.
Yeah, Ricky
is still alive.
Yeah.
So Ricky is our only witness, really.
This is true.
To something happening.
Yes.
He would think that Mel was the killer.
Right.
I just think that's how I would have ended it.
Yeah,
but
for sure.
They didn't call me back before I was born.
Yeah, 8 years before you were born.
There's one crappy adult, counselor, so not quite an adult, who we haven't talked about too much, which is Eddie. Fully leaving sleeping children in the middle of the woods.
Yeah.
All by themselves.
So first of all, like, it's a movie, right? But again, I'm just thinking about, like, my experience working at a summer camp. There would have absolutely been 2 adults, right?
Yeah. I don't know how it's done in the 80s, but
or in that specific camp.
Yeah. Not only to take care of the children, but also to have other witnesses in case one of those adults is a creep.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
And to make sure no, false accusations can be made either, I guess.
Whatever. Yeah. And also, like, no, that's not how it works. Like, 2 kids are cold. Like, you don't take 2 kids back.
Yeah.
You either take them all back or you tell them to suck it up.
Right.
And go to bed. You
know?
Or
you get them more blankets.
Yeah, something.
Like, there are other options, Eddie. You don't leave children alone in the middle of the woods.
Right. And it's like, it sounds like they drove a van out there. Like, they have them sleep in the van. It's probably warmer in there. I don't know. Yeah, Eddie. Because this is the thing. It's like, this is so the truth that, like, camp counselors are also children. Like, it is children watching children.
Yeah, they don't know what they're fucking doing.
Yeah. Like, I remember when I was a counselor and, like, my very first week with campers, I was 18 years old, which was just, like, an atrocious mistake. I don't know who let me do that. And I had a camper who needed to take an ADHD med every morning. And I forgot about her med for, like, the first 3 days. I just kept forgetting. And she's 9. She didn't think about it either. And admin would get so mad at me for, like, not remembering. And in my brain, I'm just like, I'm 18 years old. Like, I can't even remember to take my meds, let alone another, like, a kid to take hers.
Yeah.
Like, why am I in charge of this?
Why? Yeah, that's what it keeps coming back to is why are any of these kids in charge of any of this?
That's true. Yeah.
Why are these bullies getting away with this? Why is no adult stepping in to do anything?
There's just no adults. They just don't exist in this world, right? And I think that's also really true in the slasher genre is a lack of adults, right?
That's true. That is another element of that.
Yeah.
But it's interesting with this one because we actually do have an adult who's very present in this film. Mel is factually an adult.
Yes.
He's just the fucking worst.
He's the worst, yeah. It's like everybody in this movie, every character is like so cruel and just like is incapable of responding with empathy, except maybe for Ronnie. Yeah. Who like actually has that moment of being like, let's see what we can find you in the kitchen.
And
like, let's get you something to eat, please.
Seem to like think like, and he's the one who like stands up for Angela one of the times when Meg is bullying her.
Yes.
Like he does seem to be somebody who's like trying. But he also seems to be somebody who is also just a counselor and is thus, I don't know, he probably is like the 18 Erika, you know?
Yeah.
who's somehow supposed to be responsible for getting all these kids their meds. Only in this case, these kids are killing each other.
Yeah, right.
It's like, he can only do so much.
It's true. Really, yeah. And especially, like, with Mel above him, like...
Because, he wants to, like, do something about these murders.
Yeah.
He's like, maybe these weren't just accidents. He's like, maybe we should close down the camp. A lot of kids are leaving. Like,
yeah.
But it's just like Mel gets to do what he wants because he's the one in charge.
It's like his camp. Yeah, whatever that means.
Like,
yeah.
So even when we have this one empathetic, rationally thinking character, they have no position of power. They can't do anything about it.
Get outvoted. Yeah. Also, I think for me, watching this film, I was really just like, God, children are so cruel.
They are. It's one of those things where it's like, in ordinary circumstances, the cruelty of children leads to kids fighting, kids having bad days, kids getting angry, kids getting upset, you know, it leads to, hurt feelings.
Yeah.
It doesn't lead to people dying.
This is true. Yes.
But then when you get into these extreme circumstances, kids being douchebags leads to kids dying.
Yeah. Because, like, there's no adults, right? So it's just like kids being, it's like Lord of the Flies.
Yeah.
Kind of, yeah. It's like...
I was thinking of Yellow Jackets, yeah.
Yeah.
Which,
haven't seen, but yes, same thing.
Mm-hmm. Everything gets escalated.
Yeah, everything, there's not...
Everything's just heightened.
Yeah, and, like, everybody's so, like, impulsive, and, like...
Because that's what kids are.
Yeah, because kids are impulsive, and, like, all of the examples of Angela literally just sitting there, and all of a sudden, like, being yelled at.
Yeah.
And, like, called names.
By multiple different kids.
By multiple different kids, just... because she's just sitting there.
Yeah.
And it's just like,
and
what
it's like,
is your problem?
And because there's like no adults to step in and be like, hey, this is not okay.
Yeah, right.
Or no adult ever stepped in to be like, hey, Angela, you've suffered something really fucking traumatic. Let's keep an eye on that.
Yeah.
Because nobody is stepping in to do anything. It's just all left up to these kids. And what these kids are going to do is fucking cruel.
It really is. Yeah. It's like, and I even think about like the girl at the beginning on the water ski. Like, she wants to stop, and the two people in the boat are just, like, actively ignoring her.
Yeah.
Like, they do not care. And even as Artie is, like, carted away, bandaged up, screaming his fucking head off, everybody around him's just kind of staring at him. Nobody's being like, ooh, like, there's just no empathy.
Yeah. No, and there's something about this movie, which at first I thought was just sort of an aspect of it being, like, an 80s film. Mm-hmm. But also I think goes with that really nicely is just how long after we find, a dead body or something horrific happens, how long we linger on a shot of somebody just staring and not doing anything.
Right. Yeah.
Being horrified, being scared.
Yeah.
But in that like freeze response.
Yeah.
And it's like, yeah, who's doing anything in this movie?
Yeah.
We get it right from the beginning with right after the dad and the sister die.
Yeah.
We get the girl who was on the ski.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, she's just in the water, like screaming like, somebody do get him out of the water, do something. And we have like, I think we see Lenny on the shore, like just sort of standing there in shock and on. It's like, those are your children and your husband, do something.
Yeah, do something, yeah.
It's like, nobody does anything ever.
Right. And I was also like kind of thinking about the theme of the cruelty of children and how that might like affect the intention behind the quote unquote reveal at the end. Like, that's a really cruel thing to do to a person.
To Angela?
Yeah. I mean, everything they do to Angela is a cruel thing to do to a person.
Well, that is... Should we get into a literary corner? Because we're talking about how that ending is kind of cruel to Angela, and I think you're right. Mm-hmm. And I think because we're throwing around the word twist ending a lot and like shocking ending.
Right. The reveal.
Yeah. That for our literary corner, we could actually just talk about like what a twist ending is, what function it serves, when it's good and when it's bad.
Right. Yeah.
And like how it functions in horror. So essentially, if we're talking about the structure of a story,
right.
Every story has a plot, which is just the things that happen.
Yes.
And most stories follow very familiar sequences when forming their plots. So like audience expect and are used to things like inciting incidents and rising action and climactic finishes, like whether or not we're consciously aware of what all those things are and what they mean, and how they're working. Like we still expect like a beginning, a middle, and an end. We still expect things to like go in a certain order and like have certain beats.
Yeah.
And so a plot twist is there to just sort of upset that sequence, to take a little different turn, a little swerve, a little twist.
Right.
And so they're great because they add shock and surprise.
Yes.
By doing something that you weren't expecting. But they also, if they're done well, add depth to the story.
Right.
By like revealing something that some sort of like previously hidden element to the characters or to the setting.
Right. Making an unexpected callback.
I did want to give some like specific types of twists.
Okay.
That I think are relevant to this film. There are a lot of different types of twists.
Categorized?
Yeah.
Fascinating.
There are a lot of different types of twists, but the ones that
the
I
M.
think
Night Shyamalan kind of twist?
we're going to talk about him too.
Okay.
Though.
Okay.
No, but just like in basic terms, there's a few that are relevant. There's anagnorisis, which is just like a Greek for like recognition or something. It goes back to the days of like Greek plays and stuff.
Yeah.
Which is like when a character discovers something either about their own identity or about another key character's identity, like near the end of Oedipus Rex, when he finds out that he has, killed his father and married his mother.
Mom, yeah.
That was a pretty shocking twist for him.
True.
Right?
This is true. Yeah.
And of course, that's something we get in this movie. Just saying.
That's true. Yeah.
There's analepsis, which is just a fancy word for a flashback.
Oh, okay.
Which, is just a device that's often used to reveal the twist.
Right.
We find out a main character's past and suddenly their actions in the present make a lot more sense. Which, again, we get that with Angela. That's a part of how a true identity is revealed.
They do this. This is so silly. They do this in the Saw movies a lot.
Oh.
Where they will show us, like, a scene, right? Mm-hmm. And then, like, later in the movie, or maybe even, like, in the next movie, they'll show us, like, the scene again, but, like, from a different perspective. And you'll see that, like, another person was in the room.
Oh.
Which is also retconning,
right?
But like that's kind of how they,
yeah. The Saw movies are interesting. I actually haven't seen any of them, but I
don't know if you could handle them.
Spoilers for the Saw movies. Isn't one of them where there's like a dead body you think's dead, and then
it's the first one.
They get up at the end, and it turns out that they were alive the whole time, which is another form of that like recognition type twist, and is also like a really famous type to have it be like somebody you thought was dead is actually the killer,
right? Yeah.
Or like, I don't know, that comes up a lot in like Agatha Christie stories. That's a big function of like, and then there were none. Mm-hmm. Another type of that sort of twist would be in her The Murder of Roger Ackroyd, where the whole time we're going along with the narrator who's telling us the story, and it turns out at the end that he was the one who did the murder.
Whoa!
Yeah, which is a great twist,
That is good, yeah.
Yeah, she's famous for twists. Detective novels are a great place to get twists, you know. Gothic novels are another good place, which I think is also relevant for horror.
Right.
You get it like the twists at the end of like Rebecca or Jane Eyre.
Yeah.
Oh, another bit of vocabulary we've already been talking about is a red herring.
Yes, that's true.
Which not everybody knows what a red herring is.
Right.
It's often used in like mystery fiction or that type of things, where it's a false series of clues that leads the characters and thus the audience to like make the wrong conclusion. Yeah. So we were just talking about how there's a bit of a confusion about like, is it Angela? Is it Ricky? There are a lot of clues there saying that it could be Ricky.
Yeah.
And so like it makes sense why Mel thinks it's Ricky. Ricky is talking a lot about revenge.
Yeah.
A lot of these bullies are kind of like, people that Ricky has a hard time with too, Right,
because he's been going to that camp for years, right? Yeah, he knows those people, Do you know how I learned the term red herring? This TV show called A Pup Named Scooby-Doo.
That's how I learned it too, because there's the guy whose name is like...
Fred, who like hates red herring, and he like every episode wants to blame it on him. And then I think probably my dad might have explained it to me. And I was just like, why is his name Red Herring?
Yeah. And I guess the other thing to point out about twists is that it's often a twist ending, but it doesn't have to be. Like there is a mid twist, or like also shows that have like a bunch of little twists all in a row, and like the tension stays really high the whole time, and it's just like twist after twist after twist, and it gets like really complicated. But I do think twist endings are probably like the most popular form, or the most well-known. They're the ones that people talk about the most,
right?
I would say. And I would also say that horror films in general, like horror as a genre, loves a twist ending. Like you were just saying with M. Night Shyamalan. Like that's what he's known for pretty much ever since The Sixth Sense. I assume that was the first one he did that had a really shocking twist.
I am not an M. Night Shyamalan scholar.
Yeah,
but
it certainly is the one that's always brought up as like the ultimate best twist endings of all time. Like The Sixth Sense is always up there.
Yeah, and I really like the Nate Bargatze joke about how like actually pretty obvious it is that Bruce Willis's character is dead. Yeah, like we literally see him get shot in the first scene. You know? And he has the joke about like it made more sense to us that his wife just didn't talk to him for a year.
Yeah,
than he was dead.
Yeah, but that's the thing about a twist ending. Is sort of like that's part of what makes a twist ending good. Is that when you look back, you need to be like, oh, duh, yeah,
or like, oh yeah, of course, yeah,
and how that compares to like what makes a. I think now in our current media culture, we have a lot of examples of bad twists.
Yeah.
And I think a big reason for that is that a lot of these twists are just sort of shocking for shock's sake.
Yeah.
And like they forget that when you're writing a story, it needs to be able to still stand without that twist at the end. It still needs to be a good story. It can't hinge all on this shock being shocking.
Yes.
One person I saw writing about this was like, you have to make the sundae first and then you can put the cherry on top, you know?
Yes. Yeah.
And that also, your shock ending should make your audience experience two things. First, surprise.
Yeah.
You should be like, whoa, what just happened? That's
Yeah.
crazy. And then after a second, oh, shit. Yeah, that did just happen. Of course.
It does make sense.
It should feel like inevitable when you look back.
Right.
A twist should be rewarded with like reviewings.
Right. Yes. Yeah.
You know? And I think that was true with this one. Since we went in already knowing the twist that with Angela, you can see right at the beginning, they tell us right in the first scene, one of the kids is dead and the other kid is still alive, and it's the boy kid. We see him still sort of treading water.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, we see it right in the beginning.
Yeah. And then we do get a lot of those kind of like drops in like dialogue, like Kenny being like, wait till the other boys are going to hear about this.
Aunt Martha being like, don't let everybody know that I like, sort of fudged your physicals.
Yeah. And then she's like, I am a doctor. And like, Aunt Martha, there's no way you're a doctor. Sorry, Martha. No.
You shouldn't be.
You shouldn't be. What kind of doctor? What do we know? Like, do you have a PhD in like romance languages? What are you talking about?
So I want to talk about like what makes a good twist and whether this movie actually has a good twist or not.
Yeah.
So one of the things is that it should feel kind of inevitable. Like the clue should be there.
Yeah.
I think another important aspect is that it should have consequences. It should still like matter to the overall arc of the story.
Right.
It can't just be there for the sake of the surprise. It needs to matter.
Right.
It needs to like connect to the themes or like something like that. And it needs to be plausible within the realms of the story. It can't come out of left field.
Right.
It should probably coincide with some sort of choice because choice is really what makes stories interesting. So like a motivation revealed that explains why this character made this really surprising choice. Or like crucial information at the right moment that makes a protagonist do something really surprising that you wouldn't expect them to do. But this changed everything, you know?
Yeah.
And I think it's aided by clues that, reward you on the second viewing, like I already said.
Yeah.
But also should probably, for fun, be thrown off by red herrings.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like some clues in the other direction. I think that makes it more fun. I think it should happen when the stakes are really high so that it can have the most relevance.
Yeah.
And and it should just sort of like kind of change your entire understanding of the story.
So does Sleepaway Camp do that?
And to me, the reveal that Angela is the killer, I think is pretty well done.
Okay. Yeah.
Because I think it is sort of a shock. Like I said before, I think it's kind of unlikely that this meek girl is somehow committing all these murders.
Right.
Just from like a physical standpoint. Like she fucking decapitated a dude.
That's true.
Like what the fuck? Yeah. Like I also don't think it's like totally implausible because like she is the one who was getting bullying and harassment and like we learn about her trauma. So I think her like reactions, all of her actions make sense when we get that, when we connect her to the child who experienced that trauma in the beginning. Like I think that all connects together. I think her cousin Ricky works really well as a red herring.
Right. Yep.
Made even more plausible because they actually had Ricky's actor act out a lot of the murders.
Yeah.
Which is interesting.
Yeah.
And like it certainly happens when the stakes are highest. So that's good because it's like the greatest number of murders.
Yep.
Nell just beat Ricky near to death.
Yeah.
It has these really thematic consequences because it shows like the violence that children can do to others and to themselves when they're not taken seriously. Mm-hmm. However, the twist that Angela was once like Peter or whatever, I'm open to discussion about that one.
Yeah, I feel like it doesn't really have a consequence.
Yeah.
'Cause, like after that, like there's a freeze frame and then the screen turns green and then the credits roll.
I know.
Like, okay,
the fade to green is weird too.
The fade to green was a weird choice. Fucking 1983, am I right?
Yeah. I think it's relevant that it's one of the kids from the boat accident, but it could have been either kid.
And also, having never seen the sequels,
Yeah.
I don't know if there like was a consequence, but it doesn't really feel like there's a consequence.
Yeah, and I also just don't know that. I guess I would feel differently about the reveal if it had just been through the flashbacks. But I think what's really troubling to me, the reason why this twist doesn't work for me and instead just feels like kind of a gut punch, and like not in a good way, not like a fun whoa shock, but like a oh god, this is horrible, is because like that is so clearly someone else's body,
right? Yeah,
and like they have him wearing a mask of her face,
yeah,
and she's making these like weird hisses and like her mouth is all open and weird, like so like the problematic part for me was seeing this like child
Right.
being presented as this like really dehumanized kind of like monstrous thing that's like a change to her character that doesn't feel true. Like her being trans, sure. Her being this like monstrous figure is like really where she's like hissing and stuff,
making weird animal sounds.
Where she's just like naked and screaming. It's like before she was this child who like it had experienced trauma and maybe was lashing out for it in these ways, but like there's this like sense of care given to her. But like you said, this ending just feels really cruel to her.
Yeah.
They just take all of these things that happen to her and be like, and it doesn't matter because she's a monster now.
Yeah.
And it's like, what the fuck?
And the last line that Ronnie says is like, she's a boy.
Yeah. It's like, that's what you care about right now, Ronnie?
Yeah, that's what.
There is a decapitated head in your hands.
Yeah.
What the fuck, Ronnie?
You have seen the results of several murders over the course of this summer, and like that's what gets your attention. Okay, Ronnie.
It's fucked up.
Okay, yeah.
So I don't know. I mean, this goes back to what we said. Would this still be a cult classic if it wasn't for that twist? And is it a cult classic for like good reasons?
Right.
You know, considering that that's what the twist is. And I don't know how I feel about it. I guess I feel different ways at different times.
Yeah. Tell me about it. Right. Yeah. It's like depends on the day. Right.
And I think, and I do think I would feel really different without that final reveal. And it's like, why did we need to see this child naked at all?
Right.
And then why did it have to be clearly an adult man's body? Because the idea that trans women are actually predator men.
Actually men. Yeah.
It's just like, and it's like she was a child and now she's like this adult body. It's just, I don't know. I just can't do that. But like the rest of the reveal is okay for me.
Yeah.
Where it's like, the aunt being weird and making her be Angela. Like, we could have just had that in the flashback. We got the information we needed.
That's true. We did get what we needed. We didn't actually need to see a penis.
And even still, the way that they did it.
That is supposed to belong to a child.
Yeah. And then, like, having her screaming and hissing and I don't know. I just feel bad about it. It, like, doesn't make me feel good.
I do. No. I do have one more question about Aunt Martha, though.
Okay, yeah.
Is like, how is Ricky so like seemingly normal as he is with a mom like that? Like, he just seems like a normal teenage boy. Like, he just wants to make sure that there's chips in his lunch bag, and you know, he seems cool. Like, he's got friends.
And Aunt Martha is so weird.
Yeah.
Like, when we first were watching it, I was like, is she just a really bad actor or is she just this fucking crazy? I was like, what am I supposed to get? And I think we're supposed to think she's pretty crazy.
Yeah, that she's,
But not towards Ricky, only towards Angela?
Yeah, or like, well, even Ricky like knows that his mom is like a lot, you know?
That's true. He makes some jokes about it.
Yeah.
But in the way a kid is sort of like ribbing his mom.
Yeah.
Not like, wow, my mom is fucking insane.
Yeah, and he's like, whatever, you know, like gonna go away to camp for a couple months now. And I was like, yeah, maybe that's best. I don't know. Yeah.
I don't know.
I was just like, I don't know. Ricky seems like pretty well adjusted, all things considered.
Yeah. I mean, he's very obsessed with revenge, but
this is true. He is obsessed with revenge. Also, like,
but he's somebody who like stands up for people,
and we don't.
Like,
that's true.
He seems like a good kid,
and we don't know where his dad is. We just know that he left. Yeah, that's all we know.
And he once had a gay uncle.
He once had a gay uncle.
Alas,
two gay uncles.
Two gay uncles.
Yeah.
Alas.
Well, I wonder maybe what I have lined up for Slasher Corner here might be able to address some of those thoughts.
Cool.
So we know that there's like many staples of a slasher that like make a slasher, right? And a really big one of them is the psycho killer. And often, not always, but often that psycho killer has a penchant for cross-dressing.
Yes.
And this can happen for a variety of reasons, and sometimes the reasons aren't super clear. So I've got this really great quote from Carol J. Clover.
Okay.
Before she wrote Men, Women, and Chainsaws, she wrote an article called Her Body Himself.
Oh, I've actually read that
about
before.
Gender in the slasher, yeah. And there was just this one little quote that really stood out to me where she says, slasher films present us in startlingly direct terms with a world in which male and female are at desperate odds, but in which at the same time masculinity and femininity are more states of mind than body. The slasher film gives us a clearer picture of current social attitudes, at least among the segment of the population that forms its erstwhile audience. Right? And so what we get in 20th century American media, right? We get this reflection of homosexuality and just general gender nonconformity is really inextricably linked under like one big anti-queerness umbrella, right? Where like the queerness is coded as unfamiliar and potentially dangerous or deceptive.
Right.
And this is shown to us through characters cross-dressing.
Yeah.
Right. We can actually pretty well pinpoint 20th century America's like fascination with cross-dressing and transness in the collective imagination. A really, really big aspect of it is Ed Gein.
Yeah.
Whose crimes span...
At least on horror films.
Yeah, 1947 to 1957, when he's caught in 1957. And a lot of what he says in, you know, it's hard because he did have a lot of body parts on his farm. And a lot of them were female body parts, right? But it's unfortunate because Ed Gein probably had a very low IQ and kind of fell into that trap a lot of people fall into with law enforcement, where they kind of get like wrapped up into confessing to stuff they didn't do.
Yeah, and they'll just agree because they just want to say whatever
Yeah.
they want to hear.
Yeah. There is some like testimony of Ed Gein saying that like he wishes he were a woman.
Yeah.
And it's like so hard. It's just like, is that because
The
of
cops
how you
fed that?
identify?
Yeah.
Or did the cops feed you that?
Yeah.
Or were you fed that by your like fucking crazy mom? So that part kind of gets really blown out, in my opinion, out of proportion for all of the other stuff there is to know about Ed Gein. But there's also, had you ever heard of this actress? Her name was Christine Jorgensen.
Yeah.
So I got to, apparently Christine Jorgensen also kind of puts what they call at the time sex reassignment,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah, 'cause she was, like,
on the map, right?
The first big public example of it.
Yeah, and she meant to just kind of transition quietly, I think in Europe, but she gets outed in 1952.
Yeah, and it became a big like public to-do.
Yeah, it was a big thing, and
big media.
And it's my understanding that I'm sure that there were some people who were like about it, you know, but like it really seemed like a lot of it was like, look at this like marvel of modern science.
Yeah, look
like,
what science can do.
Yeah, look, you know, somebody can be born male and can like become female. You know? Yeah, honestly, like from what I understand about Christine Jorgensen, seems like a super cool chick.
Yeah.
You know, and
Yeah.
she does seem to like be talking pretty openly about her transition and like the surgeries that she's had, you know. She gets outed because she wrote a letter to her parents that gets leaked to the press in New York. And one of the lines in her letter to her parents, she says, "Nature made a mistake which I have had corrected, and now I am your daughter." I like that. I was like,
Yeah, it's
nature
a
made a
nice-
mistake.
yeah, it's a
it's
nice
cool.
one.
I took care of it. It's fine.
It's
I got
fine.
it. You know,
It's fine. These things happen.
Yeah, and I'm your daughter. Like, just FYI.
Yeah.
So we also have like that story kind of going around mid-century, you know,
Yeah.
which is psyching the general public's understanding of gender.
what's possible.
Yeah. And so we've got some pretty big examples of the psycho killer in a slasher movie cross-dressing, right? And like there's three very explicitly based off of Ed Gein. There's Norman Bates in Psycho, Buffalo Bill in Silence of the Lambs, and Leatherface in Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
Yeah.
So Norman Bates, he dresses as a woman partially as a way to hide his identity. And Bates isn't really like a trans character.
No, he's more of like a fractured identity.
Yeah,
character.
yeah. And Psycho kind of like, I got this from an article, Blood, Bodies, and Binaries, Trans Women in Horror, written by Jenny Holtz. Says,
That's a good title.
Psycho, it is a good title, yeah. Psycho turns his cross-dressing into a sign of murderous tendencies. He's less affiliated with what is now thought of trans identity, but Bates is one of the first representations to associate cross-dressing with a tendency to kill, right?
Yeah.
And again, doing the research and reading a lot of articles, many of them stated multiple times that like the actual FBI has found absolutely no correlation between like cross-dressing or genuine transness and violence. And I was like, yeah, I know.
Yeah.
I guess some
No.
people still need to know, but yeah.
No, there's going back to Harmony Colangelo, she has this other quote talking about Sleepaway Camp where she says, "As any fans of true crime could tell you, an unfortunately common trend in the childhoods of many murderers is that they, typically men, were forced to cross-dress by their guardians. Obviously, this isn't always the case, and cross-dressing isn't enough to make someone want to commit the type of crimes that would land them on true crime podcasts in the first place. But people being forced to present or live as the gender they do not identify with can cause immeasurable psychological damage that can manifest in intense feelings of shame, depression, and anger. Angela's killing spree has real-world parallels that I'm pretty sure the writers lucked into. And I think that's because there are some, like, you know, serial killers and killers who historically were like maybe made to cross-dress by parents or something like that comes up. I think people take all these things of these like cross-dressing and things and say, okay, so then they make this connection between cross-dressing and killing when the actual connection is people being forced to perform a gender that isn't their own gender.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
And so it's more pointing to the harm that can happen when we don't allow trans people to express their true gender, you know? That, like, that's really where the harm is happening.
Yeah, right.
Which isn't to say that trans people who aren't allowed to transition then become killers, because that also very much is not the case historically either.
Right.
But that it does lead to depression and suicide. And
that is unfortunately the case for this next case study, Buffalo Bill and Silence of the Lambs.
Okay.
So I got this from Harmony Colangelo, dressing down the quote-unquote killer cross-dresser trope.
Yeah.
Is it inherently problematic? Harmony states that Buffalo Bill is a trans woman.
I agree with that.
I agree too, because the movie tries to deny it, right? Like there's scenes with Clarice and Hannibal Lecter where they're just like, well, he's not actually blah, blah, blah,
and
blah,
it's
blah.
like, well, how the fuck do you know?
Right. But the fact is...
Random cis people?
Is that like Buffalo Bill was actively trying to take steps to medically transition and was denied.
Yeah, which often happens to actual trans people.
Does happen, yeah. And of course, then there is like the absolute horrible representation of being denied gender affirming care and deciding to like torture and murder women.
Right.
Yeah.
And like make a suit.
Yeah.
And it's, and no, people talk about, a lot of trans writers, when I was looking actually into this movie, talking about how Silence of the Lambs is like the worst thing that has ever happened to trans women.
Yes. Yeah.
Because, I mean, compared to Sleepaway Camp, Silence of the Lamb got so much more recognition.
It won Best Picture.
Yeah, like people saw it.
It swept the Oscars that year.
Like trans children watched it with their parents, where their parents were more horrified by Bill trying to perform femininity than they were by like the cannibal.
Yeah,
and it just like crazy harmful movie.
Yeah,
that is so beloved and still considered such a classic.
It's tough because like it is a really good movie.
Yeah,
and it like will be forever tainted by that. You know? Yeah. So Buffalo Bill, I think in my list here, the only actual trans person. Except maybe Angela in Sleepaway Camp.
Right.
So then we've got Leatherface and Texas Chainsaw Massacre. So this actually happens throughout the franchise. Leatherface, even in the very first one in 1974, like moves between masculinity and femininity a lot. Like when he's out of the house, he's Leatherface with his apron and his chainsaw. But like when he's in the home, he like, especially in the first one, like he's in the kitchen, he's like wearing an apron. And like several
performing
femininity.
Housewife, motherhood.
Yeah. He wears makeup on his mask several times over the course of the franchise. The most clear example is Texas Chainsaw Massacre: The Next Generation, which comes out in 1994. Well, like Leatherface is almost really barely considered a human, right? And like that's another thing about the psycho killer and the slasher is that like often
the dehumanization.
But like they do need to be obviously a person.
Yeah.
You know? And Leatherface kind of doesn't do that as much, you know? That's kind of where Texas Chainsaw Massacre kind of breaks away. Although technically you could consider it like a proto slasher anyway.
Right.
So, you know, it just like Leatherface is like pretty well documented as just kind of moving between masculinity and femininity. It's just like what Leatherface does. It's what, you know, it's whatever.
Right. It's just like another example of all the ways that Leatherface is like beyond the bounds of normal morality, probably.
Right. Yeah. And
in this like cis-normative view of
and there
morality.
Are also just like, there really aren't a lot of women around. And so, like, I almost wonder if Leatherface sort of, like, takes on, like, well, there are no women around.
Somebody needs to be mother.
Somebody needs to be the mom.
Yeah.
So I'll be the mom, you know? I genuinely don't know. Another example is a movie I've never seen, Dressed to Kill.
Yeah, I saw that one come up a lot, but I haven't seen it.
Or it comes up a lot when you look into such things. I've never seen it, and honestly doesn't seem like my kind of thing. And this is one where another like really harmful representation of transness, where it's like really directly equated with mental illness. The killer is meant to be a transgender woman with bipolar disorder.
Oh.
And when manic, she dresses as a woman and kills the occasional woman. When depressed, she presents more masculine and is nonviolent.
Okay.
Bobby's therapist in the film, Bobby's the character's name, denies her gender confirming care, right? And believes her trans identity to be a result of her bipolar.
Which is a thing that actually still happens.
That happens,
in
yeah.
the commons,
Bobby's trans identity is like totally written off as like a side effect of being bipolar, right?
Right.
And I wrote a little note, a little question I wrote to myself. I mean, what could be more psychotic than choosing to be a woman?
Yeah. I mean, yeah.
Yeah.
But it is the similar, like, disavowal. Like, they're trying to have their cake and eat it, too, where they can have, like, this cross-dressing killer, but then be like, but it's not a real trans person. Like, she's not actually trans, or
bipolar.
he's not actually trans. Yeah. So we're not saying that trans people are killers. That would be wrong. It's the same thing that they do with Buffalo Bill. Where it's like, Buffalo Bill isn't actually a trans woman. He's just somebody who's crazy. So we can have this person who's like a cross-dresser and a killer and not be saying bad things, you know, not being harmful to trans people or whatever. And it's like, no, you still are.
Yeah, and there's really a lot going on that, like, this killer, when in a manic episode and actually committing acts of violence, is doing so as a woman.
Yeah.
And then, like, presenting more masculine in more, like, depressive episodes.
Yeah.
You know? It's just like... Okay, make it the woman's fault. You know? Like, kind of, that's also what I think about, like, Norman Bates in Psycho, is like, yeah, he does kind of have this, like, fractured psyche and personality, and, like, part of it is, like, his mom,
who's
right?
the overbearing.
Who's, like, and it's just, like, that's
who the killer is.
That's who the killer is.
It's all the mom's fault.
Yeah, it's mom's fault, of course.
Yeah.
Let's lighten it up a little bit. Another really great example is Frankenfurter from the Rocky Horror Picture Show.
Oh.
Literally just a transvestite.
Yeah.
Which is a fancy word for crossdresser. Frankenfurter's not a trans person, just like a groovy dude who feels his oats in lingerie. And I, for one, am fine with it.
Yeah.
And also murders. But two unrelated
facts.
Just, you know, humans contain multitudes.
Yeah.
You know, you can be
And
both.
a lot of people are doing a lot of gender things in that movie.
It's true. Very true.
And not all of them are murderers.
Yes. So this brings me to...
Though it's interesting because... It's a sweet transvestite from transsexual Transylvania.
Right, yeah.
So I think it is also another case of being the confused, like, that confusion between what's a drag queen, what's a trans person.
Right. And also just,
line.
like, the mixing up of the language.
Yeah.
Right? It's just, like, just to make the rhyme, probably.
Yeah,
which I understand, you know. So there's Angela in Sleepaway Camp, right? And honestly, who Angela in Sleepaway Camp most reminds me of is the old woman from Insidious, but gets a feature in Insidious 2. So this character is forced to live as a girl by his mom. Oh. Even though we get flashbacks in Insidious 2, where I think it's Parker Crane is the character's name, really pushes back, like does not, was like, I don't want to be a girl. Like, I don't want to wear this dress. I don't want to wear this wig, you know? But all that pushback is met with, like, abuse by his mom, right? And so that's kind of what happens to this character, is that, like, he, quote unquote, goes crazy or something.
Right.
And, like, commits these murders, like, dressed up as... They call her the Black Bride. It's like a black wedding dress with like a black veil, right? And it's like a guy like putting on makeup and like putting on this dress, right? You know, but we do get the backstory that like he was forced to live as a girl against his will, which is honestly really similar to how I see Angela in Sleepaway Camp. Yeah, you know. So what I was noticing, like looking through all this, you know, I see the connection to like an overbearing or abusive mother. And a usually absent father in a lot of these like cross-dressing killers.
Which are things that go back to the roots of Ed Gein, right?
Yes. And also just
probably by way of Psycho.
Just very Freudian. So a lot of questions come up for me about these characters, right? It's like, how much of their gender dysphoria is caused by growing up in an abusive environment? Much like in like the real life case of Ed Gein, right? Are they experiencing gender dysphoria at all? We don't really know. Like Buffalo Bill, yes. Right? But like
Angela, we don't know.
Leatherface, we don't know. like Norman Bates, we don't really know, right?
Yeah.
And also wondering like what role does sexual orientation play in this as well, right? It's like that absolute nonsense that sometimes trans people have to deal with, where they're like, like a trans woman is like interested in dating women, and it's just like, well, why didn't you just stay a guy?
Yeah.
And it's like, okay,
No,
there's like
because
5 things wrong with what you just said.
Yeah. Trans women can be lesbians.
Yeah.
Hey-oh.
And sexual orientation and gender identity have nothing to do with each other. Like where does sexual orientation play into this? Like, does Angela find herself attracted to Paul? And like, what does that mean for her knowing who she is?
Right. Yeah.
Right. You know?
Yeah. Was that experience where she had that flashback right then to her dad's?
Yeah.
Because it was some sort of like gay panic response.
Right.
Or not.
Or not.
We don't know.
Or just I didn't really want this to happen and it's happening response.
Yeah. And it's just, I don't think the movie cares.
No, that's exactly
That's
it.
kind of where I go to with a lot of these movies, is that I just don't think they care.
Oh my gosh, you read my mind. That's what I was just gonna like wrap this up with, is like, most of the time these questions aren't really even answerable because the picture of these characters is incomplete because they're created and viewed through like a cisgender heterosexist gaze. Yeah. Like there is no answer. Right. So it's however we want to like read into it, you know?
Which I think is why they can have such polarizing responses in like queer communities and trans communities, where Sleepaway Camp can have a lot of people who really love Angela. Yeah. As like a trans character, trans girl, or see her kind of more as like a representation of the trans experience as being a boy who's being forced to be a girl, you know, or like, people who are like, no, this movie fucking sucks and is painful to watch,
or is like the butt of a joke,
or it's just, it can have so many different responses because we have to put so much on it from ourselves, because the movies don't care themselves.
Like as I was mentioning earlier, you know, these depictions of transness through the psycho crossdresser, right? In some ways they can be like problematically empowering, you know, at best, but like at worst they're like directly harmful to not like trans people, gender nonconforming people, and also just like women in general, you know,
mentally ill people often, because often they're combined, just all around bad.
And also again, like I have to remember this movie's from 1983, right? It's like there's just like a really unfortunate lack of understanding and like complexities that come with like gender identity and grouping a lot of different experiences together, some consensual, some not, right? You know, just like grouping all of these different experiences into like the same box of like not cisgendered.
And not straight, not cis.
Just there. And it's like, but there's a lot more.
There's a lot more. And I think it's interesting how you keep saying that you want to remember that this is made in the 80s.
83,
that like, I don't know, that like people knew about transness and like could have been giving air to like actual trans writers at the time, but also that comparing that to now where we expect better, I guess. Right? We expect better. But I don't know that has happened.
No,
we had that like trans tipping point. And then it was like, well, like there are some horror movies, like we just watched Bit together, which has Nicole Maines, who I have the biggest crush on, and it's like a horror movie, and like her transness is a part of the movie. But I don't know. I'm sure there are other examples, but none like Silence of the Lambs.
Right. That's the, you know,
in terms of like recognition from the audience, you know, and like the Academy.
Right. It's like, this is the other thing, is that like, you know, representation is really important. Like I wouldn't, like these are still really harmful, you know, but like I don't think these depictions would be as bad if we had other depictions, if it wasn't all we had. If we got to see like, kind of like in Bit, where we get like an actually like trans final girl. Right. Or like a trans promising young woman. Right. Like, so if we could like kind of even out the representation, then, you know, it's like in Lord of the Rings, right? Where like Sauron's the bad guy. Wait. Is that the eye? Who's the wizard?
Oh, Saruman.
Do you see how I got them confused? Okay. Saruman is like a bad guy, right? And he's white, but like everyone else is too, right? So like you're not necessarily saying anything about like the evilness of whiteness because all of the good guys are also white, right? So it's like, so we could have...
Meanwhile, the orcs are kind of coded as people of color.
Yes, they are. Yes.
And there's nobody else who is.
Right. Well, I mean, you get the dwarfs that are
kind of Jewish
coded. Yeah. So
not to talk about Lord of the Rings.
So this is basically like a call to action. Like, let's start making some more movies with like trans people.
Because I think we are in this place where like I said, we love villains, and there's a reason why all of these like queer coded villains and a lot of things are like really beloved by a lot of queer people.
Yeah.
And part of it is that, well, we don't have a lot of other options for queer characters to love. And the other thing is that, like, well, in this case, we're actually just seeing queer people as like full people who can do good and bad.
Right. Yeah. A full character.
And so like sometimes that means that they're, murderers, and that can be fun and cool. Like, murderers can be cool characters, but it's like we have to actually have a full spectrum of just people being people, of like trans people just being trans people, of other types of queer people just being people, for that to like work and not be just a bunch of harmful stereotypes that have real world consequences.
So I think this is where we announce that we're making a movie.
Yes. My version of Scream with the lesbian final killers.
There you go. Yes. I love it. I don't know about you, but I'm ready to play a game.
Let's play a game. Yeah, we've got a lot of heaviness in this episode. Yeah. So let's line it up before we let you all go.
So as previously mentioned, I have significant experience with Girl Scout camps.
And I do not have any experience with any camps.
Yeah. So one of the things I picked up, the mini skill sets that I picked up working at a Girl Scout camp, are these things that I always refer to as don't tell games, which are basically just games where somebody who doesn't know the rules plays it with somebody who does, and the person who doesn't know the rules figures out the rules by playing the game.
Yeah.
Much like life.
Yeah. I've done something like that, but where it was like a card game.
Yes.
And like rules would get added. Yes. As like whoever won the round would get to add a roll.
Yes. Yeah, you can do it with cards. However, this is an audio medium.
So we will not do that.
So I want to play with you the two most infuriating.
Oh God.
Okay.
I'm already ready to be upset.
Okay. So I learned this one at camp, and I call it the triangle game. Here's how it works.
Oh God.
I quote unquote create an imaginary triangle between three objects.
Okay.
And we decide who the triangle belongs to, quote unquote.
Okay.
So for instance, if I said there is a triangle between our microphones and your laptop.
Okay.
Whose triangle is it?
Mine?
It is yours. You're right.
It is mine.
Yes, it's your triangle. Yes.
Okay.
So we could do it again. Like there's a triangle from Jupiter to Saturn to the Earth.
Oh,
whose triangle is it?
Is it still mine?
It is still yours.
Why though?
But why?
But why would it be mine? I don't own the Earth.
You could say like, there's a triangle between, like the TV, the stereo, and the fan, right?
Okay, sure.
Whose is it? It's actually mine. I'm saying it's mine.
Why?
So it's mine.
But why though?
Do you want me to just tell you, or do we want to do another one?
I don't know that I'll get it. Does it have to do with the type of triangle? For example, an isosceles or an equilateral?
It has nothing to do with the triangle.
It has nothing to do with the triangle?
This is the way don't tell games work. It has nothing to do with what you're presented with.
Oh my God.
So like if there's a triangle between the bedroom, the bathroom, and this couch, whose triangle is it?
I don't know. Is that one also yours?
No, it's yours.
Why? I hate this. I'm going to commit murder. I'm being bullied on the pod.
Do you want me to tell you?
Yes.
So basically, it's so stupid. It belongs to whoever speaks first. So when I asked whose triangle is it, you spoke first to say it was yours. And yes, it was yours.
And then the only time it wasn't mine was when
I
said
it first,
it's mine.
Yeah, it's very
that's
silly.
So stupid.
I think I've got one that's even more infuriating.
Okay.
This
I'll get mad.
This one's called How Many Bears?
Oh God.
So it's very similar. I would say like there are 3 bears in the Eiffel Tower.
Okay.
4 bears on the Golden Gate Bridge, and like 30 bears in the Empire State Building. How many bears are there?
I feel like there's going to be more than just me adding.
Oh, you know it.
because I don't think it's, what was that, 37 or something?
It's not. It's 5. 5 bears. I know.
I'm so upset.
So let's do another one here. Okay. So there are 10 bears in the playground.
Okay.
4 bears in the backyard.
Okay.
And another 4 bears down the street. How many bears?
10.
No, 3.
3
bears.
This defies math.
It really does. It has nothing to do with math. This is how Don't Tell games work. Yeah.
The triangles didn't matter about the
Nope.
triangles.
Nope.
The numbers don't matter about the numbers.
The bears don't matter.
Why would there be 3? Give me another one. I'm going to get it this time.
You are.
I'm going to crack it.
Okay, so 2 bears in China, 4 bears in Italy, 9 bears in Morocco. How many bears are there?
Okay, you counted with your fingers to imply that there are 5. But then how come the first time there were 3?
The first time there was 5.
There was 5 the first time too?
The second time there was 3.
Okay, well how come the second time there were 3?
Because I asked a different question. I asked how many bears.
What the fuck?
Yeah. So
I don't pay attention when you talk.
Right. So that's the rule. The rule is there are as many bears as there were words in the question, how many bears, right? So you could ask how many bears. How many bears are there? How many bears in total? You know, like you could ask, whatever, however you want to ask the question about how many bears there are, the number of words in that question.
And this is why so many murders happen at sleepaway camps.
Yes, absolutely.
It's because we're driving the children insane.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's absolute insanity. But let's just play one more here. And so this one's called Desert Island. There is only a certain kind of thing that can go on my desert island.
Okay.
And you have to say things and then answer yes or no, and you have to figure out what the theme is, what can go
okay. So we're looking for a theme.
Islands. Yes. Just for the sake of time, I should narrow it down. It has something to do with horror films.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm gonna start with can your desert island have a hornet's nest?
Yes.
Did I get it in one?
Yes. God damn it.
Can it have a hot iron?
Yes, it can.
How about an arrow through somebody's neck?
Only if it's right through somebody's neck.
Yes.
Yeah.
See, I'm very good at these games when they aren't stupid.
When they make 0 sense. Yes, murder weapons from Sleepaway Camp.
Yeah,
yes.
nice.
Maybe that was too easy, but it's okay.
So thank you for showing me these games.
Yeah,
I never want to go to Sleepaway Camp. Not just because of the murder, mostly because of the games.
The games, yes. That's a pretty good example of what camp is like, because you really do have a lot of time to kill, and so you play games and
so
you
that
sing
you
songs.
don't bully each other.
Yeah, you play games and you sing songs, and just kind of the psychological torment of asking a 9-year-old how many bears.
Yeah,
and them being
there's 3.
Yeah, and they're like, nah! And it's oh, this is so great. Because they drive you crazy, too.
So you gotta get them back. You gotta get them back.
This is so satisfying. This has been Deep Thought, Shallow Plots.
Join us next time.
Oh, yeah.
Because we're doing, this is a part of our summer series.
Yes.
So next time we'll be doing Midsommar.
We do have an Instagram.
Follow us on that Instagram.
At Deep Thought, Shallow Plots.
Give us reviews on on your podcast catcher of choice.
I think, honestly, at this moment, there is 1 5-star review.
Oh.
And it's me.
Oh.
Yeah.
You made me excited.
On Spotify.
I was like, oh, maybe it was one of our moms.
No, it was me. Yeah. My mom doesn't know how to do that. Maybe your mom does.
She has been listening.
That's lovely. Yeah, so
shout out to our moms.
Yeah. So until next time, eat shit and live.